I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you to Christ Presbyterian Church for providing their space, to Worker Justice Wisconsin, to those who will be speaking today, to the press who are here, who are working to ensure our message about safe jobs is heard and that every worker's right is advocated for. My name is Kevin Gunlock. I'm the president of the South Central Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. And this past year, not every worker has had their right to a safe job, nor have many of our communities, and the list is long. We have had more workers die this year from the list that was given to us by OSHA, 150 names. That's more than any other year we've been doing this that I know of. And each year that we've been doing this, I go on Google, and I do Google searches for other workers who aren't on that list to see if we've missed anyone. And I usually get an additional 20 to 30 names. So, and this is happening apparently all over the country is what I've heard. You know, since 2011, we've seen an assault on workers' rights in this state, and more recently, attacks nationally on worker safety. When laws that protect workers and the general public are weakened, that is not caring about safe jobs. When safety programs and government agencies are cut that are supposed to be about worker safety, that is not about safe jobs. When it's more difficult for workers to organize and organize around worker safety, among other things, that is not advocating for safe jobs. And when the rights of workers to bargain over workplace safety issues are taken away, that is not promoting safe jobs, and frankly, it's not promoting public safety either. And the result, I believe the result of that, and I think many people share this belief, we are seeing more workers losing their life and limb each and every year. Today, you will hear from speakers who will elaborate more about what is going on at their workplace, what they are doing about workplace safety, and what we can do as well. So, to start, I welcome Rabbi Lori Zimmerman from the congregation Sharai Shemayim to lead us in a prayer.
Friends, let us bless. Let us bless the workers. Let us bless the workers who died too soon, who died because of negligence and apathy, because the boss wanted to cut corners, because the corporation had to drive up profits, because no one cared, because time was short. Let us bless the thousands of workers who died this past year. We take a moment of silence. Let us bless the millions of workers who have become injured at work or ill because of their jobs, who were simply earning a living to feed their families, but who came home broken and ailing, cast aside, used up, no longer able to produce profit, their stories forgotten. We take a moment of silence. And let us bless the millions of undocumented immigrants, many of them workers, who have no legal protections, who are so susceptible to exploitation, who die needlessly in the shadows. We take a moment of silence. In their memory, I offer a Jewish memorial prayer, El Malei Rachamim. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant peace beneath the shelter of your presence to these beloved souls. Let them rest in the heights of the holy and pure, who shine with the splendor of the heavens. May they rest in the Garden of Eden. Please, source of mercy, guard them beneath the protection of your wings for all eternity. Bind their souls in the bonds of life. You are their inheritance. May they rest in peace, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
In Judaism, when someone dies, we are commanded to remember. We say, let their memories be for a blessing. We remember the workers, their contributions, their labor, their sweat, and their tears. We remember their will to survive, and we say, let their memories be for a blessing. We remember the workers, their determination to provide food for their families, to give them shelter, buy them clothing, take them to the doctor, and all of us say together, let their memories be for a blessing. We remember the workers for who they were, unique, beautiful souls, each with an individual story, with dreams of a better life, and we say, let their memories be for a blessing. We remember all together the source of life. Help us to take risks in the name of justice, to love our neighbors as ourselves, to protect the immigrant and the stranger, to act with strength, determination, and power, to raise our voices, to challenge prejudice, inequity, and oppression, to create a world where no worker dies in vain. And we end our prayer with the words of the great Mother Jones. Let us pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living. And we say, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Lori. Next, we have a speaker to talk about OSHA and what they're doing. Chad Greenwood, Acting Area Director of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Chad.
Good morning. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you for inviting us to participate, and thank you all for coming out and on this day to honor Workers' Memorial Day. Workers' Memorial Day is observed every year on April 28th, and it is also happens to be the date that OSHA was established back in 1971. On Workers' Memorial Day, OSHA wants to renew our commitment to making safety a priority through education, outreach, training, and collaboration with American workers, businesses, and our state partners. American workers are the backbone of our nation's prosperity, and in recent years we continue to lose just over 5,000 workers on the job each year, which averages to about 100 a week, or 14 deaths every day, and that's too many. One is too many. Today we honor those who have been injured or lost their lives in the workplace, and use that to help strengthen and support our nation. So we encourage everyone to be proactive on continuing to do training, safety practices for workers and employers, which plays a key role in reducing fatalities and injuries. Look at developing programs and making those extra efforts to prevent those injuries and fatalities on the job. Take time, everyone, to ask questions about whether it's the safety regulations that are out there, the workplace precautions that you could be taking, the best practices you could be taking, because it could save not only an injury, it could save a life, it could save your own life or your coworker's life. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Next, we have speaker. Our next speaker is Wisconsin State Representative Lisa Subeck.
For a moment there, I thought Kevin was going to promote me to speaker.
I'd be all right with that.
Yeah, looking ahead. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for including me in the program. It frustrates me to no end to learn that every year over the last almost a decade, at least since 2011, the number of workers' lives that we are losing every year continues to climb. And that's no coincidence. Workplace injuries and workplace deaths are preventable. And it is no coincidence that since 2011 in Wisconsin we have seen an increase, because we have seen a dismantling of our laws that are geared and designed to protect workers. Since Republicans took control of our legislature and of our governor's office, we have seen the biggest attacks on workers' rights, workers' respect, and workers' safety in our state's entire history, and it's shameful. I can list a number of actions they've taken, but I will only highlight a few key ones. Starting with the passage, of course, of Act 10, which took away the ability of our public workers to be at the bargaining table, bargaining and discussing with their employer issues of safety, really basic stuff that helps keep workers safe and helps keep them alive on the job. That wasn't enough, unfortunately, for our Republican governor and our Republican legislature. They have since passed laws banning prevailing wage, which ensures that we can hire the most qualified, well-trained, and therefore safest workforce. They have passed a so-called right-to-work law. Again, direct attack on the ability of workers to be at the table, negotiating not only for wages and benefits, but for important workplace safety measures. And nobody knows better than our workers how to keep our workplaces safe. These attacks have got to come to an end because the results are staggering. And in a little while, you will hear over 150 names read of people who died due to workplace safety issues this year alone. And that number is greater than last year, greater than the year before, and that number continues to grow. These are preventable deaths, and we see preventable injuries and preventable illnesses impacting our workplaces day after day. And as long as the folks who currently control our legislature and our governor's office are in office, that will continue. This year alone, we saw some of the largest attacks on licensing and credentialing at the hands of the majority party in our legislature. They are engaged in a very clear race to the bottom. We can change that. Let's fight for a race to the top. Let's go back to the days when Wisconsin valued our workforce, when we held high workplace standards, and we stood up for workers. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. 50 years ago, a great civil rights worker and leader died while working and doing his job. Bill Franks, the chair of the NAACP Labor and Industry Committee, will be speaking on the history of the sanitation workers that Martin Luther King Jr., alongside AFSCME and other union members, fought for, and it was due to safety conditions. So, Bill?
Good to see that many of you have taken the time to continue to be with us. I won't reintroduce myself. Kevin already took care of that. Workers' Memorial Day is observed every year on April 28th, the same day that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration was established in 1971. I would try and address the connection between today's press conference event, Workers' Memorial Day, and the work of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the context of the trade union and social justice movements that embrace civil and human rights for working people. We need to travel back in time some 50 years. Tensions were already at a fever pitch in Memphis, Tennessee, when on February 1st in 1968, 50 years ago, two workers, Echo Cole and Robert Walker, were crushed to death by a malfunctioning compactor after they climbed into the back of the truck to escape the rain. There was little attention given to these tragic deaths at the time, but the organizers used this and other events to galvanize the workers and to keep the pressure on Mayor Henry Loeb and the Memphis city officials. 11 days later, 1,300 black men from the Memphis Department of Public Works went on strike. Although the union had been granted a charter by AFSCME in 1966, they had been unable to arouse the support of local religious leaders and middle-income folks. I never use the term middle class because we don't have that much consciousness in this country to understand what a class is, but we're working on that. On February 11th, the local branch of the NAACP passed a resolution supporting the strike in a meeting attended by 700 men. The late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was asked to journey to Memphis, Tennessee in support of the sanitation workers' strike and their struggle to form a union. A march scheduled for March 18th turned violent, and Dr. King had to be escorted away for his own safety. Another march was scheduled on April 5th. The night before that, on April 4th is when Dr. King gave his now famous I Have a Dream speech. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference and other organizations just prior to Dr. King's assassination were already planning the beginning campaigns for the Poor People's March. Garbage collector turned strike organizer T.O. Owens, with the support of the president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, aka AFSCME, Jerry Worth, demanded recognition of their union, better safety standards, and a decent wage. On April 16, 1968, the strike was finally settled.
Thanks, Bill. School safety has been in the news a lot lately, and our students, our younger generation, are really becoming activists in this country. And I think that's exciting for the future. But you know, there's another group of people that are doing a lot for school safety, for student safety, for worker safety, and those are the employees and the union members of our school district. So Doug Keeler, the executive director of the Madison Teachers, Inc., is here to speak about the connection between school district unions and advocating for student, school, and public safety. Doug?
Thank you, Kevin. Before I give my remarks, I also just want to acknowledge a personal story quickly. A few years ago, my nephew was working carpenter on a construction site in downtown Madison. He turned his head, and a coworker in front of him took a spill over the building and fell to his death. Right? This stuff is real. My nephew keeps thinking if he could have just reached out, if there's any way he could have grabbed this guy before he fell, right? This happens. These are not just statistics. They happen to people we know, people we care about. And for every workplace fatality, you have a grieving family and grieving coworkers. So just start with the point of truth, okay? Now, I'm here to talk about the school district. As Kevin mentioned, I'm here representing 4,000 school district employees, teachers, and others who are working today, and I'm here in their place to represent their concerns. When Kevin asked me to speak, I took a look quickly at workplace fatalities according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What's the most recent information I could find? And shockingly, what I found was the second highest category of workplace fatalities was caused by violence in the workplace. Right? Transportation was number one. People who drive for a living, understandable. Violence in the workplace was number two. 2016, 500 workplace homicides, 291 workplace suicides. How often do we think of those things as workplace injuries and fatalities? This is our new reality, right? While still there's far higher risks for high-risk professions such as logging and fishing and roofing, school district employees have also faced increasing workplace threats to their health and safety. Last month, our members were working on rallies to address gun violence. And we had some t-shirts printed. And they're orange t-shirts. Down the front it said enough. And on the back it referenced the 290 school shootings since 2012. The unfortunate thing is the day we distributed those t-shirts, it became obsolete because the 291st school shooting had taken place. Right? Reality. We're all familiar now with the 3 teachers and 14 others who were killed on Valentine's Day at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. We've kind of forgotten about Marshall County High School in Kentucky, Aztec High School in New Mexico, Freeman High School in Washington, North Park Elementary in California, and so on and so on and so on. Many of us have even forgotten about West End High School in Casanova, Wisconsin, where a school principal was shot and killed in 2006. It's ironic today that school buildings, which remain some of the safest places in the lives of many of our students, also need to practice regular active shooter lockdown drills. Right? Our kids are practicing active shooter lockdown drills at school. So what are we doing? You know, what do unions do, right? Well, we're representing the workers and we're representing the things that they care about. And for us, it's students. The workers we represent care about their students. And we're working on workplace violence and school safety in a whole variety of capacities. One, unfortunately, we're working with the school district and the Madison Police Department to really fine-tune our code red lockdown procedures to make sure that if we need to run and hide, we can do that most effectively. That's a sad reality, but that's a reality that we face. Second, we're working with the district to try to ensure that every school building has the safest possible construction, that we don't have classrooms next to entrances, that we have classroom doors that actually can lock from inside in case somebody enters the building. These are also things of our reality. But the other thing that we're doing is we're redoubling our efforts to elect political leaders who have the courage to advocate for common sense gun reforms so that our grandkids won't need to practice the same active shooter lockdown drills that our kids are. In closure, what I'd say, what we're doing at MTI and teachers unions around the country and what all unions do is we are offering workers hope and we're offering support. And we're thinking about homicides and suicide. What we need to foster is workplaces where there's a sense of belonging, support, and solidarity, and where workers feel comfortable to bring up the concerns that they see front and center. So, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Doug. So you've already heard some stories about workplace safety and how people are getting injured or actually die as a result of that not being there. But we also have union members and unions that take care of those workers when they are injured, sometimes severely. And when they do get injured, we need the workers that are there at those hospitals and those ER rooms to have the right to say at that workplace, this is the best way to save this life. So Victoria Gutierrez is our next speaker. She's a registered nurse and an SEI union member, and she's here to speak on the connection between the hospital employee unions and the high injury rates of those workers. The CNAs and nurses have some of the highest injury rates themselves, and there's reasons for that. And you know, if we want patient care, and we're talking about public safety as well, I think every type of worker, especially nurses in this case, should have a right to talk about those issues so they can literally save lives.
Good morning. My name is Victoria Gutierrez, and I've been a nurse for over 15 years. I'm a proud union member in both of my nursing roles. I'm a critical care floor nurse at a private sector union hospital, and I'm also a substitute nurse in the Madison Metropolitan School District, supporting the health of public school students. I'm a single mother to my 12-year-old son, whom I'm able to support due to the stability and benefits won through the collective bargaining of my union, SEIU Healthcare Wisconsin. I'm here today in my role as a union nurse to recognize the sacrifices of my fellow healthcare workers in all healthcare facilities who face unsafe conditions, who have died, or who have suffered from exposure to hazards at work. I am also here to recognize the contribution of all of those in my union who have fought to keep our workplaces safe. We know safer workplaces for nurses and caregivers are also safer for our patients. Several years ago, when I started out as a neophyte nurse, I recall a tragic event when a nurse at a non-union hospital was working hours, many hours beyond her scheduled shift and working overtime, and she tragically committed a fatal error. That nurse was pushed beyond her limits in an attempt to fulfill the insufficient staffing needs of her department. In this case, this nurse accidentally hung the wrong medication and in turn caused a tragic sentinel event, the patient's death. And I remember seeing myself in that nurse, how in an effort with good intentions to help tight staffing, we all work beyond what could physically be possible or safe, despite the fatigue we experience. All nurses understand this level of fatigue, and we attempt to be superhuman and work our shift with all pistons firing, even if they aren't. I was a new nurse, but I also understood the importance to my nursing practice and career of being in a hospital where the union had successfully bargained to eliminate mandatory overtime. I was relieved to know that my union fought to empower me to give the best quality patient care possible, and that I could not be mandated to stay and work beyond my scheduled shift. Our patients are human beings, and that means that they are unpredictable and they are complex. And nurses need to be able to troubleshoot the unpredictability of our patients' conditions. What seems like a stable patient load at the start of my shift can take a turn when a patient reports chest pain, another patient at the same time has a seizure or a stroke. As nurses and caregivers in the trenches providing care for our patients, we know what is needed to provide quality care, and we need to have the resources to adequately deal with these emergent situations as they arise. And our working conditions are our patients' healing conditions. If our workplace is frantic due to poor staffing, it is more difficult for patients to heal, and research has shown that there are poor patient outcomes as well. Poor staffing creates challenges to be able to safely physically handle our patients. The hard physical work we endure as nurses causes physical strain on our bodies and backs. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, healthcare workers endure musculoskeletal injuries 3 times the rate of construction workers. Often management implements lean nurse staffing models to protect the bottom line profits in a hospital and the healthcare industry, which put profits over our patients' lives. We are told that there is a nursing shortage, which is often an excuse to not budget for adequate nurse-to-patient staffing ratios. However, according to the U.S. Health Resources and Services Administration, we've actually been experiencing a surplus of educated nurses for years. Our expertise costs money, and hospital and healthcare administrators are unwilling to make budgetary allowances to staff for the growing patient acuity in our hospitals. One of the most important ways that I and the nurses with whom I work have been able to fight against threats to our safety and the health at our workplaces and to advocate for quality patient care has been through our collective bargaining. This includes our victory on the ban of mandated overtime, our advocacy on safety committees to review lifting technologies to reduce the back strains and injuries that we experience, and review exposures to toxic chemicals and bloodborne pathogens. Over 20 years ago now, our union helped to pass legislation on needle stick protections for healthcare workers. Every contract, our nurses put safe staffing and scheduling issues on the table to negotiate. And every contract, we are met with stubborn resistance by administration to do more with less. We need to follow the lead of other states and pass legislation for mandatory safe nurse-to-patient ratios. We need to pass also safe patient handling legislation that requires healthcare facilities to establish comprehensive safe patient handling programs. Unfortunately, here in Wisconsin, our nurses and healthcare workers across the whole spectrum are left without these legislative protections, and we have to do better. Nurses are the voice for the health and safety, not only concerning our patients in hospitals and healthcare facilities, but also in our communities. When we talk about worker health and safety, we are also talking about public safety, how we live, the conditions we live in, the fight for clean water that we drink, and the clean air that we breathe. When healthcare is profit-driven, what guarantee do we have that our health and safety are protected? History shows we have very little. And Mother Jones' words ring loud and true today. Pray for the dead, but fight like hell for the living. And we must continue to fight together for health and safety for everyone.
Thanks, Victoria. Our next speaker is Wisconsin State Senator John Erpenbach, who actually took off from his part-time job to be here today. And we have a lot of legislation for next session, I think, for both of you. So, John.
We're making a mess.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you. My part-time job on Fridays and some other days during the week when I can is I drive a shuttle for a hotel. And so in about 15, 20 minutes, I'll be slipping back into a different uniform with a name tag. I want to thank you for letting me be part of today. It's amazing just to think about the idea that Kevin's going to read 150 names here in a minute. If there were 150 people who were killed or were injured while driving a car, a particular car, that car would be recalled immediately. If there were 150 people who got sick at a restaurant, the restaurant would be shut down immediately, and people would go in and figure out how they got sick. Now, granted, people work different jobs, and they're killed on different jobs, but it still comes down to safety. It comes down to safety. And the idea, just the very idea that we have to pass a law to make sure that people are as safe as they possibly can be on the job, first of all, It should never been repealed, but more importantly, we shouldn't need laws like that. It should be an automatic. It should be a given. It should be a given that management must sit down with the employees to discuss job safety, better training. But they don't have to do that anymore because of Scott Walker. If the Department of Corrections were honest as to what's going on in our institutions right now, the number of assaults are up. The number of violent assaults are way up. It's a direct result of Act 10. And when I deal with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle on this, and we try to force votes dealing with just negotiating job safety, forget wages, forget benefits, forget all, just safety, they would say no. People, why wouldn't they be safe on their job? That's their response. People go to work and they should be safe. Well, they're not. They're absolutely not. And the idea that the state is going to tell a school district that we're going to make you apply for a grant so you can make your schools safer, as opposed to just letting school districts go out and get the money they need on their own to make sure that their teachers and the kids and the staff and everybody who walks through that door when the bell rings is safe, is ridiculous. Schools should be doing that on their own, yet it's the state and the majority party that doesn't allow them to do that. I can't imagine going to a job, punching a clock, and wondering whether or not, because of short staffing, I'm either going to be forced into overtime or I'm going to actually be able to get home that night simply because I'm not safe on my job. The idea that OSHA was formed back in the 70s, and it's 2018, and we are here today talking about people, 150 people in Wisconsin alone, who've died on the job, it makes me sick. And the idea that a politician's vote, whether they vote yes or no, will ensure whether you will be safe or less safe on your job, makes me sick too. So, if the governor doesn't understand the ramifications of Act 10, just in job safety alone, if the governor doesn't recognize that 150 people died on their job this year in Wisconsin alone, doesn't believe that that's an epidemic that should be addressed immediately, then we need a new governor. If the legislature doesn't recognize, the majority party doesn't recognize the fact that somebody's going to go to work today and odds are may not come home tonight or may not come home tomorrow or may come home severely injured, and they don't realize that that's a problem, then we need a new majority party. So, it doesn't matter if you farm, it doesn't matter if you're a mechanic, it doesn't matter if you're a teacher, it doesn't matter if you're a nurse, it doesn't matter if you're a correctional officer, it doesn't matter what you do for a living, you deserve the right to be safe on your job. That's the bottom line. So, I do understand collective bargaining has done wonderful things for the state. You negotiate wages, you negotiate benefits, you negotiate child labor laws, you negotiate staffing levels, you negotiate all of that. But from every single union member that I have talked to since Act 10, yeah, it was good to negotiate about that, but the thing they missed the most is be able to sit down with management and talk about staffing levels, talk about safety. That's what they really, really wanted to talk about. And in the end, come together with management to make sure that people are safe on the job. And that those numbers of 150 will actually go down as opposed to probably go up next year. So I want to thank you for letting me be part of today, but today is where we start. And we will have to see changes this fall and new faces in new places at the building right down the street in order to make sure that every single Wisconsinite is safe as they possibly can be when they go to work. Thank you for having me out today. I appreciate it.
So we contacted U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin's office, and she was very possibly being able to make it today, but ironically, Tammy's unable to make it today, this Workers' Memorial Day event, because she's spending the day in Superior in the wake of the horrible blast and resulting fire at the Husky refinery in Superior. Given the power of the blast, the intensity of the fire, and the number of the workers there at the time, and there were a lot of workers, there's over 100 and some workers that were working there, it's kind of a miracle that no one was hurt. But even with miracles and divine intervention, human intervention also saves lives. That's what's going to save lives. You know, she's meeting with the operating engineers who work at the refinery and were on site when the explosion occurred. And she wanted to express her thoughts that, she stands with us again today, and representing her today is her Constituent Services Director, Sarah Anstad. So Sarah, if you want to raise your hand. So thank you for attending. She also wanted to let us know that she's recently taken 2 actions in the U.S. Senate to protect worker safety and highlight the importance of Workers' Memorial Day. First, she has introduced the Protecting America's Workers Act to help keep workers safe and promote justice for injured, sickened, or deceased workers. The bill would establish a Bill of Rights for families of workers killed on the job. It would also expand coverage of OSHA to many public employees. And I can say this because I'm not a government employee for the federal government, but there are not enough OSHA inspectors in this state, nor any state. It takes them over 100 years. If they had to check every single business in the state of Wisconsin, it would take them over 100 years to do so. It's ridiculous. We need to have more inspectors for OSHA so they can do their job and make sure Second, she has introduced a resolution to recognize Workers' Memorial Day and call for action to address increases in violence for healthcare workers, which addresses one of our workers here today. And I'm sure she'll be talked by many others in the room and myself as well for other issues that she can take up. Tammy believes Workers' Memorial Day is a day to honor those workers who have died on the job, to acknowledge the grievous suffering experienced by families and communities, and to recommit ourselves to the fight for safe and healthful workplaces for all. With that, we will be reading the names of the deceased. So if all could rise for reading of the names of the deceased, and then we'll have it's traditionally a 2-minute moment of silence. It takes 1 second for this worker, 1 second for someone to die because of a mistake or whatnot. So I'm going to suggest that we have a moment of silence for 2.5 minutes to recognize 1 second for each worker's life that passed away. So first, the reading of the names, and if you just want to come up here and then walk to the other side.
Stuart Mason, Todd McClintock, John McConnell, Eric Medina, Stephen Miller, Joel Negron Rosario, an unknown worker, because people aren't always named that die, unfortunately, Roy Nelson, Carlos Nunez, Scott Owen.
Unknown worker, Dale Reinecke, Angel Reyes Sanchez, Charles Roadback, Nathan Sari, Alex Saldana. Unknown worker, Aaron Salzwedel, Mary Ann Schmitz.
Julio Garcia, Luis Humberto Garcia, Richard Gardner, Caswell Nick Gersh, Michael C. Gonsler. Unknown worker, Robert Goodenow, Michael Gregoni, Curtis Groom, Dwayne Gunderson.
Isaac Knotts, Andrew Knutson, Guy K. Coleman, Danny Koski, unknown worker, Thurston Lambie, Larry Lane, Robert Levine, Charles Liebfried, Rick Limberg.
Richard Maurice Hansen, Leo Haas, unknown worker, Milton Heffenstein, Kathleen Helkstead, Robert Hemling, Jonathan Henke, Treston Isham, Robert A. Issen, unknown worker.
Roland E. Sharetti, Austin Shellhouse, Karen Simic, Warren Simplot, unknown worker. Thomas Skeemdor, Robert Stankus, Keith Stefanik, Dakota Steinmetz, and Lori Strothenke.
Rosalind Johnson, Tim Johnson, Danielle Jones, Jeff Jones Jr., Penny Campen, John Kelsey, unknown worker, Jacob Kingbird, Jeff Kirby Jr., Brad Kirschnick.
Jay Kalk, Shane Cash, William Cherney, Yu Chen, James Christofferson, unknown worker, Michael Collins, Robert Carvello, Jerry Demlow, Gary DeMotz.
Carl Brunetsky, unknown worker, Will Block, Anthony T. Bowarkowski, David Breitbach, Donald Boos, Dave Buck, Joseph Birch, unknown worker, Brian Butterfuss.
Brian Dickman, unknown worker. Ray Donahue, Christ Edward, Jason Everts, Peter Fiedler, Andrew Fox, Brian Fox, unknown worker, John Furkovich.
Gerardo Ahumada Diaz, Richard C. Andrews, Robert Allman, Lee Austin, Karen L. Barclay, unknown worker, Guy Bartram, Alan Bates, Anthony Bean, Dylan Bulio.
Unknown worker, David Sturgis, Clifford J. Thibault, Daniel Timmerman, Powell Tordoff, Andrew J. Tyler, Laura Van Asten, unknown worker, Jason Vogeltans, Michael Wallace.
Thomas Oxendorf, Anthony Papalardo, Dale C. Phillips, unknown worker, Ronald Pierre Zydach, Anthony Pratt, James Prem, Calvis Price, Gary Ratliff, Robert Reed.
Jason T. Wieland, Michael A. Wesolowski, Robert Wonderland, Gregory G. Zisowich, an unknown worker.
I just received a text. Oh, I'm sorry.
Unfortunately, a few more. Michael Lindeen, unknown worker, Diane Look, John Lucas, Curtis Lustia, Scott Lutenberger, Kevin Lutz, Ala Mahmoud, unknown worker, Gary Maresh.
Thank you. I just received a text earlier during the event that 3 more workers had died. There was a medical helicopter crash up north. I'm not sure the details, but we do know there were 3, it was 3 workers that died. So I'll read those 3 as unknown workers. So unknown worker, unknown worker, unknown worker. With that, a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I think you've heard from the stories that we have a lot of work to do. We will be praying for the dead, but we'll also be fighting like hell for the living. So thank you again.